Greetings, dear listeners. You are listening to Horror Nerds at Church, a ridiculously queer podcast where we take a deep dive into a horror film or a book and talk about how it connects to queerness, religion, and theology. I'm Pastor Emily, and I am the All Father.
I love it. My name is Pace Warfield, and I am the inexplicable fear of fire that Frankenstein's monster has.
My name is Steve Case. I am the author, and I have been pretty much shaped like the Frankenstein monster since I was 13. So,
Love it.
That's fantastic.
Well, listeners, follow us on Patreon at patreon.com/horror nerds at church for the video of today's episode. It's only $5 to sign up, so much cheaper than grave robbing and building your own Frankenstein's monster. And doing so, you can get exclusive access to hours of bonus content, including BooTube episodes about TV shows, movie commentaries, bonus episodes, and more.
For our book mini season, you do not have to have read the book to follow along. We won't reveal major spoilers without warning, but instead, listening is a chance to get some flavor of the books, some of the lore in them, and what kind of treasures await if you pick up the book yourself from your local bookshop or library. So we are excited about. I'm super excited about this. This is like
oh my,
really good, like Halloween timing,
perfect.
spooky season timing, but also the combination, like, we're literally called Horror Nerds at Church. And so the combination of horror and monster and Frankenstein and Book of Prayer is amazing.
Yes.
So
That is literally how I found you. I was going through podcasts looking for places I could send the book and typed in horror and nerds, and you guys came up. It's like it couldn't be better.
Right.
That is fantastic. I love it. I love it. So we have as our guest Steve Case, who literally wrote the book. He was born and raised in Northeast Ohio, moved to Orlando, Florida about 20 years ago, and now resides in North Carolina. Steve was a youth pastor for 35 years with several different denominations and is licensed and commissioned with the United Church of Christ. Steve has actually written more than 45 books, most of its curriculum, and everything from analysis of the writings of a 17th century monk. Which one?
Brother Lawrence, the practice of the
Brother Lawrence.
presence.
Nice.
And then followed it up with a few books of fart jokes.
Biblical fart jokes.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Even better.
Yes, the great moments in biblical flatulence is the one that seems to be doing better than the others, but
I love it.
It was the original, so you know.
Yeah.
That is fantastic. That is such a wide variety of books.
Yeah, I found I have to do that for the way my own brain works. I can't just stay totally focused on the serious. I have to flip back and forth, otherwise, I would just go nuts. So
yeah. That's I have similar things when it comes to like the work that I do.
Yeah.
So yeah, that makes sense.
And to be clear, when Emily said that we have the author of the book, Frankenstein Book of Prayer, we mean the book Frankenstein Book of Prayer, which I have a copy of right here. It's so cool. Not the original Frankenstein. As much as I would love to create a seance and invite Mary Shelley to our podcast, I'm not quite sure she'd be willing to join.
We could try some Mary Shelley necromancy.
Right.
Ooh,
that'd be the worst thing. Yes, I did mean the Frankenstein Book of Prayer.
Yes.
Yeah. So we do have a couple announcements for our podcast listeners. The pet costume contest is still open. Submissions are open until October 27th. So if you have a pet, a plant, a stuffed animal, honestly, a drawing, I could enter the Beholder and I would be okay with it, except that I'm one of the judges, so I won't. The Beholder is a visual for you Patreon folks. So you are welcome to submit anything you want. If you have multiple pets, you can submit them separately or together. And then we'll give you probably 48-ish hours to vote afterwards, and we'll have everybody vote, and then we will do a live announcement of the winner on Halloween. And a reminder that if you win, you get one of the books we've covered this season, free merch, and the runner up will receive a book and a sticker from the merch store, and one random entry from all of them, whether you're one of the top two, gets the game Horror Trivia. So
right here.
Super exciting.
Yep. And you can submit just by emailing horrornerds@church@gmail.com. In the years past, I made like a complicated Google form and stuff, but this year we're keeping it easy. Just email us a picture of your pet and we'll count that as your submission, or your plant, or your stuffed animal, or your drawing, or whatever.
Basically, we just want you to submit something because it's fun.
Yep.
That's where we go. Yeah.
And then the only other announcement I have is I think this is the first time we're actually mentioning it on air for everybody to hear, but our season 6, which has been postponed indefinitely because the WGA and SAG-AFTRA strikes, we now have tentatively scheduled to start in January. Now that resolutions are looking like they're imminent. I know there's been a recent setback, but we're aiming for January. So hopefully, if things continue to resolve, we will start our Star Wars and Alien season for you with the advent of the new year.
And we've been working hard on it in the background anyway. So no matter what is happening, it's just the timing. We need the AMTPT to get their shit together, basically.
Pretty much. Yeah. So, but as Emily said, we have Steve Case with us today, and I am so excited to get a chance to talk to you because in our email exchange ahead of time, after you had submitted your bio, I was like, there's no way that this is the same Steve Case that wrote the Book of Uncommon Prayer, which I have used many times when I used to do youth ministry. And I built up the courage and I asked, and you're like, yep, that's me. So it's like,
that would be me.
It's just so fantastic to have you on for a variety of reasons.
Oh, thank you.
But one of the questions we ask all of our guests on this show is if you have a real life church horror story. It can be a paranormal horror story. We've had many hauntings in church buildings. We've even had a few exorcism stories. But more often than not, it's just church people being shitty and awful to each other, which seems to be the case whenever we have community, you know?
Yeah.
So
it's almost like we're all human and we mess up,
right?
Oh, my mother said she never learned to swear until she went to work for a church. So,
wow,
that has been true. So,
yeah.
But let's see. When I was in college, I was a church custodian, for a number of years, and it was a good gig because you show up in the evening, you unlock, you set up for the meetings, and then they give you an office. You can just sit and study for a couple hours, and people leave, and then you lock up and go home. There was one evening where I was working and I could hear the church organist practicing in the sanctuary, which she had done many times. And it was the end of the evening. It was about 10 o'clock, and I'm locking up and shutting off lights, and I can still hear her practicing. I thought I better let her know she's alone in the building, that I'm locking up, and just so she knows. So I went down to the sanctuary. It was a big old church, and as the moment my hand hit the doorknob of the sanctuary door, she quit playing. It was silent, and I opened the door, and it was dark, and there was nobody there, and she hadn't been there at all, and there had been no music up until the moment I put my hand on the doorknob, and I just sort of slowly closed the door, and I went home. It was like, no,
Yeah.
I
Yep.
don't need this.
Yep.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow. That is so creepy
Very creepy.
and not surprising. Like that, I was like, oh, when you said once I put the door on, the hand
Yeah,
on the door, I
and
was
if you
like,
want a
oh,
regular horror story, let's see. I first moved to Florida. I got to work for a church where I was youth pastor number 5 in 7 years.
Wow.
ooh,
Talk about
that's a lot of turnover.
yeah, and that was longer than the guy before me. I lasted 17 months, and longer than the one who came after me. And it was just a classic church of, hey, let's treat the youth pastor like shit until he goes away, which is unfortunately happens way too often in that business.
Yeah,
For sure. For
it's
sure.
real. Yeah.
What else? What do we got? You,
Well,
Um. Yep.
you,
I guess we can get into the book then
okay,
right
all
away,
right,
if you want.
sure.
So we have a tradition on this podcast that Emily started of writing a 1-sentence summary of whatever we cover. And so I wonder, Emily, did you get a chance to do a 1-sentence summary for this book?
I did. It was really hard because all of my one sentence summaries that first came to mind were basically like, if Frankenstein wrote prayers. And I was like, I probably shouldn't use most of the words of the title in the summary. Um,
That's okay.
so the one that I landed on was When Monsters Wonder About God. Um,
I like that. That's good.
yeah, yeah.
If I take it
Did
into a
you?
sequel with vampires, I might just use that one. Yeah.
Ooh, yeah. Oh my gosh, you could totally go through like the iconic like Dracula.
Yeah, one of the first thoughts I came up with that for a follow up was to do the prayer book of Dr. Jekyll, and then you
Ooh.
Ooh,
flip it
and then
over, and it's
and
the
it's
prayer book
Mr.
of
Hyde.
Mr. Hyde, and then all of the
Yes,
verses couldn't be match those personalities. And
That is fantastic.
that would be amazing.
the one I just today I've been kicking it around. I've been trying to do some research. I want to write an ecumenical guide to fighting vampires. So it would be the Hebrew and imam and I
Yeah,
lost the word for a Sikh clergy person. All of
hmm,
them writing about how the vampires get fought within their particular faith. So
that's
there was
fantastic.
this is an aside, but there was a movie called Bordello of Blood years.
Yes.
You know it, okay?
Yep.
But at one point, the vampire, this sexy vampire madam, goes to bite the guy on the neck, and she recoils away because there's a cross, and then she realizes it was a Star of David he had around his neck, and she goes, "Oh, I thought it was a cross," and she bites him anyway.
Yep.
And I thought, well, what difference should that make? It was, what
Yeah.
shouldn't the vampire be afraid of all forms of religious iconography? So I don't
Yep.
know. That's
Ooh.
about as far as I got with it. But there has to be there's a story there somewhere.
For sure.
Yeah. I was also thinking, I mean, the vampire, how an ecumenical guide to fighting vampires is fantastic and makes me think of like the many movies we covered in our fourth season, which was our vampire, no, third season,
13, yeah.
which was our vampire season, where we covered like the Twilight books, but we also covered Interview with a Vampire and Dracula and all of them.
Nice.
Um, but the one that popped to mind, probably because we covered the movie last season, was Casper's Book of Prayer.
Oh, Casper the
Because
Friendly
I think,
Ghost.
Casper the Dead
yeah,
Toddler. Yeah.
Yep.
yeah, right. But like, what does that like? There's so much, especially for you, like of youth ministry um and like supernatural horror type stuff and prayer and I don't know, just throwing it out there.
I'm sure it could work somewhere in there. There's more that can be done, and but I got a lot of time now, so if I just get it done by summer, we can have it out for next Halloween, whatever it's
There
going
you
to
go.
be.
There you
Ooh,
go.
yeah, that'd be nice. Yeah. So, what gave you the idea then for the Frankenstein Book of Prayer?
I I have always been fascinated by the character. This uh, like I said, by the time I was 15 years old, I was 6 foot tall, and I have a very large square head, and got called Frankenstein many times as I was growing up, but uh, love the original movie that I first saw when I was a kid, in local television in Cleveland, Ohio, and that took me to the original novel, which is nothing like the 1931 movie at all. But I just loved the character, and I started
Mm-hmm.
collecting. I have a number of Frankenstein posters, pictures, books, action figures. One of those classics. And loved the DC Comics version
Oh yeah.
of
Mm.
Frankenstein, where you have the Frankenstein monster meeting Batman, which was incredibly deep, and I loved it. And I saw that combined with when I started working for the Episcopal Church in Ohio, which I was with them for 5 years. I came to love the Book of Common Prayer, and I loved prayer books, regardless of denomination or regardless of religion. Even I liked the I'm a tactile person, so I like to have a book, a hymnal, or whatever. Don't
Yeah.
project it up on the screen. I want to have the book, the hymnal in my hands, because like albums. I like having there's a collection, but I like having albums in my hand when I listen to music, that kind of thing. So I like a prayer book, and I like Frankenstein. And one day it was just like, you can make this work. So I just started
Yeah.
writing a few, and I sent them to a publisher who had done some more of my stuff, and he said, "Give me a book." It's like, okay, yes, I can. So
Yeah.
that's where that came from.
That's awesome. I have, you can't see it because my bookshelves are behind the camera, but I have my own like set of prayer books
Yeah.
um, on my shelf that's like right here on the top shelf too. So
Yeah.
I'm with you on that. Like there's something about having, and I think we'll probably get into this more. There's something about having like words for prayers
Yes.
that gives us space to name stuff we otherwise might not feel comfortable with.
Yes.
And I think Frankenstein's Book of Prayer, the Frankenstein Book of Prayer, especially does, because Frankenstein has some questions for God,
Yes.
and that's a like, yeah, I just love that part.
Thank you.
And I mean, I'm a historian, working on my PhD and stuff. So one of the things I always keep it fresh in mind is just knowing the amount of people coming over to this country from Europe. And the one book that they would almost always have, what isn't a Bible, believe it or not, but it was usually either a hymnal or a book of prayer from their
Mm.
whatever denomination they were a part of. So I just think
Mm-hmm.
that's such a fascinating subject, and I agree 100%. But one of the cool things we hope to, like, Emily and I are going to be doing this podcast forever just because there's so much out there we want to cover. And one of the ideas for our season we have, that we want to do one of these years is uh, to do a series just on Frankenstein, since there are so many different adaptations and creative
Mm.
ways of running with the story. And with all of the abundance of media out there, and you talked about a few, including DC's Frankenstein, do you have,
And the Munsters,
yeah, the monsters? Uh,
they're my
Not the
favorite.
new one. The
oh, the
Rob
Rob
Zombie
Zombie
one.
directed one, yeah.
That was.
I don't know if I've seen that one. I mean the one
Oh
when I
yeah.
was growing up.
Yeah.
So
Herman
not
Munster.
the new one.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah, yeah,
Fred Gwynn.
yeah. Okay, yeah, yeah. That one I loved.
But do you have a particular favorite adaptation of Frankenstein?
Uh, I I I adore Boris Karloff. I love the 1931, but and part of that is like, like you, having your loving your first doctor. Like
Yeah.
Yeah, yep.
Tom Baker is my doctor, because that was the first one I came to know, and all the others are compared by him. And the first Frankenstein that I remember a scene was Boris Karloff in the old black and white classic movie. I love Fred Gwynn as Herman, and uh, not a big fan of Kenneth Branagh's Frankenstein movie. It was
Yeah.
Mary. He even called it Mary
Mary
Shelley's
Shelley's.
Frankenstein, but it had nothing like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein
Yeah.
whatsoever. It's like, wait a minute, wait, that's not in the book. Why you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you're gonna go that far
Yeah,
to like make it that connected to the book, You gotta
make
make
an
it
effort,
good.
you know.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Plus,
Yep.
he like ran around without a shirt on half the movie. It's like,
That's the
okay,
real.
Kenneth,
That was the real
we get
purpose.
it. You got pecs now. Now it's okay.
Yeah. Oh, I love
Yeah.
it.
I think that's why I love Herman Munster, because that was my introduction to Frankenstein. That was the first time I ever
Yeah.
encountered Frankenstein. Paige, do you have a favorite?
I would also. So I've told this story before about little Pace. I think I was 12 or 13, going to the classic Universal Monsters movie camp as a kid, where we just would.
Wow.
It was just something like in my local community college had these these camps for kids that are like basically day camps, and this particular one was centered around the Universal classic monsters, and so we watched pretty much all of them, all of at least the original and the
Yeah.
franchises, and so that's the first time I saw um Frankenstein, and it was the 1931 film with Boris Karloff, and I think that was actually the first movie we saw as part of that camp, and that one just has always, out of all of them, perhaps tied with 1931's Dracula, made the most lasting impression for me. So for me, it'd be the same 1931 adaptation, but I
Yeah.
also love the appearance of Boris Karloff as kind of Frankenstein in Arsenic and Old Lace, if you're familiar with that.
Yes. Okay. Good
So
one.
that's another little appearance of the character, kind of, that I enjoy.
Yeah, somewhere I just had it out earlier today. There's a someone released the 1931, I think it was Dracula with Bela Lugosi, but with a new soundtrack that was written by
Yeah.
Philip Glass
Yeah,
and and performed by Kronos Quartet, who is, if you like any kind of classical oddness, Kronos, and it's an excellent version of just watching that movie with new music. It's very cool.
Yeah. I forget which version we watched. We watched Bela Lugosi's,
we
but
watched the original, but that was
okay.
something that we had talked about, was maybe in a future season for either a movie commentary or something, doing the 1931 Spanish language version and also possibly the
Mm,
Philip Glass version.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, that would be really.
yep, yep. Um, and I made the joke about summoning Shelley. I kind of wish we could, because her novel is so deeply theological as well. And so, in your introduction to Frankenstein Book of Prayer, you kind of mentioned being inspired by both the movie and the book and stuff. And I really wonder, like, what kind of those theological themes resonate with you and perhaps made it into the book from Shelley's original
I
novel.
think one of the biggest, and part of this goes back to working in youth ministry, is the creature is just looking for love. You're looking for love, you're looking to be accepted, and you don't have any idea who you are at the moment, and there's stuff in the book about, in my book, very I had the idea that some of those parts that are put together to make the creature, would they have memories of where they had been previously? Is there the creature recognizes his hands are not the hands of a laborer. Was he a musician? Was he an artist? Why? And does he remember, where do the hands remember where they came from? And do the eyes remember seeing a sunset? Even though these are not my eyes, these are somebody else's eyes. Do they remember what it was like to be alive? And are they angry about it, about being here now on me instead of somewhere else? But the idea of finding who you are and looking to be accepted, I think, is a universal, pardon the pun, idea in any faith, I think,
Yeah.
or any person who's growing up now. I'm looking to be accepted, and I want love and redemption and forgiveness and all those things that we're all looking for.
Yeah.
I loved the way that you created Frankenstein to have not the like tangible concrete memory, but the like physical memory of the sunset, of the different things that he does where he's like, "Oh, clearly some part of me has done this
Mhm.
before,
Right.
has been here before. So he doesn't remember the thing, which makes sense because presumably his brain is not all of these body parts brain, but he still remembers in a
Yeah,
different sense. And I
that
think,
bodily
Yeah.
memory. I love it.
yeah,
Physical memory of what's the word, like muscle memory. I
mm-hmm,
my your body can function and do the things, because you're of muscle memory. But if there's nothing to combat, he wouldn't have a childhood. He wouldn't have any sense of. And part of that is that going back to, what would his version or his thoughts on creator or father.
Mhm.
What do these
yeah,
words mean to somebody who never understood what those things were? And yet
Yeah.
we ask people to say, okay, pray to our Father in heaven. Well, what if my only concept of father is the guy who beat me when I was a child or ran out or
right,
something like that?
yeah,
How
Yeah.
how can love still be there with that idea?
mm-hmm,
And I think your years in youth ministry has just made you like so keenly aware of a lot of these wrestlings and how that carries over into the book as well. I love that. And something else, just because I anticipate. Yeah, one of the things I want to say before I can just anticipate the masses of angry emails we get. Yes, we do know that
Mm.
Frankenstein and Frankenstein's monster are two different things, but I love in this book how you kind of tie the two together, that he really is
mm-hmm,
Frankenstein in a sense, even if that's because he has no name,
Well,
and that's kind of the family name he has inherited through better or worse.
what else are you going to call yourself in that situation? I mean, Shelley doesn't give him a name, but if he's a thinking, reasoning, rational being, he's going to want something. So I take my father's name, which is I am Frankenstein.
Yeah,
So, and yes, there are people. "Well, no, it's the creature." A lot of people make that mistake. It's like, "Oh, just go with it,
right.
okay?
right. Like it
Frankenstein
is.
is the
There is a
monster.
like, yeah.
Deal
Well,
with it.
and the book gives a clear like understanding that Frankenstein is the creator of
Right.
the monster. So it's like, okay, you can say, "Oh, I made a mistake," but actually like you explicitly spell out how you got to that place
This is Earth
in the
Father.
book.
My Earth Father is
Yep.
Frankenstein, and I will take that name. So he
Yeah.
calls himself
Yeah.
Frankenstein.
Yeah. I also the way that Frankenstein kind of talks about himself and his different parts reminded me of one of the first dystopia, young adult dystopia series that I read called it's the Unwind series by Neil
I
Schusterman.
don't know.
Um, but it's they call it an unwind dystology, but it's a series of sci-fi novels, and the idea is your parents when you before you get to the age of 13 your parents can like retroactively say, "Oh, we shouldn't have done this," and then you get taken to this place and your body basically gets taken apart to be repurposed for people who are alive so that they like if they lost an eye or if they lost hands they can have them replaced. And so
Jeez, I thought my
it's
parents were
really
tough.
similar. Yeah. Yeah, right, like it's a like intense, but um it has those similarities of like but from the perspective of the people who are being or going to be unwound. And so like what is their perspective of going into another person, and then there's one of them that is create a person who's created from all these different people as like the ideal, right? Like the musician's hands and the like strength of this person and all of that. But yeah, it's a really I hadn't thought of it in a long time, but it definitely ties into Frankenstein's
Hmm.
whole
That's
thing.
cool.
Yeah. Um. So in the other piece, right, of like wanting a name and having cognitive functions and thinking, in the preface, Father McCandless states that he knows that Frankenstein's monster has a soul. And right now we're in this like particular point in time where like artificial intelligence is like a thing. We don't actually like label everything that is artificial intelligence as artificial intelligence, and we don't like and we label some stuff that's not artificial intelligence as artificial intelligence, but it's always a thing that we are obsessed with as humans. And I wonder like how you navigated the attribution of intelligence and souls and those things to something that is created by a human, not created by like and you
Hmm.
I think you do it really well in the book. So
Thank you.
yeah.
I think I believe all living things have a soul, and artificial intelligence. I have I have yet to see anything of artificial intelligence, like anything that, how do I say this? I have never heard music created by artificial intelligence
Mm.
that can make me cry. But there
Mm.
are pieces of music by Beethoven or by, the Beatles or by whomever who
Yeah.
can bring me to tears. And I haven't read anything. I just finished a British spy series of novels, and one of my favorite characters got killed off in book number 8, and I literally had to put the book down and walk away for a while because it was that real to me. And I know it was fiction, and I know I've written stuff where I've had people come up and say, you made me cry when you did that or wrote that.
Mm.
And you think, yes, that's what's supposed to happen. It's one of those cruel writer things where if I can bring you to the brink of tears or even make you openly weep as you're reading something, that's that's the soul of the piece that you're working
Mm.
on. I haven't seen anything from artificial intelligence that has been able to make me do that.
Yeah.
A machine can play a piece by Bach, but Yo-Yo Ma is the one who can make me stop and just sit and breathe until it's over. That kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing. I think soul is something that belongs to the living, and if it's not living, then there's no soul there. But in the case of Frankenstein, he is a living, breathing being, so he has a soul. Now, how do we explain that? Who knows? You have to ask God when you meet him.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Um the other piece that goes with that is this awareness that Frankenstein has, and the like, particularly an emotional awareness and an emotional intelligence that he demonstrates, particularly with respect to other humans. Like he knows how they're feeling, he knows what they're thinking. And it's not that he has like ESP, but I'm curious like how you came to that deep of knowledge, because it makes sense to me as someone who knows lots of people who have been traumatized and who have survived trauma, and like that deep connection and awareness of other people. But I'm curious like how you decided that that was going to be part of what the monster known as Frankenstein.
I think a lot of it was trying to put myself into that situation, or the idea of feeling isolated, growing up, or as a kid who, all I know about family occurs on the other side of this wooden wall, because he's literally hiding away from the world, but he can put his ear to the wall and listen to a family live their lives on the other
Mm-hmm.
side of the wall. And there's a picture in the book. There's only a few pictures, but one that's just literally a piece of wood, and it's like, this is what you would look at. This is what you would see. But you would
Mm-hmm.
try to absorb. Can you get the vibrations of the love or the anger or the worry or whatever, the parents, any of that on the other side of this wall? How would you deal with that? And uh, the idea the idea of listening, walking through a city, covering himself with the cloak and being amongst people, knowing that you can't do this or people would run away in revulsion and terror. So you're just part of them and absorbing what the vibrations of the people around you, the emotional.
Yeah.
I like the phrase emotional intelligence. That's a good one.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I love it. And One question that we've started this season asking all of our guests is just the simple question, real simple, of what is horror? And the reason I think this is such a relevant question for this book in particular is because Mary Shelley is often called like the mother of science fiction or speculative fiction. And her book, for some reason, isn't really considered horror, even though a lot of people, I think, would argue rightly that it's also kind of gothic horror in a sense. And then we
Mm-hmm.
get the Frankenstein 1931 movie, and that's horror, not sci-fi. And so it's like this single story kind of is defying genres. And I feel like horror itself is like that. It's a genre that, I mean, it is genre defying. And so we have an expansive definition of horror here. We say anything can be horror if you want it to be. But I'm curious though, how do you define horror?
I Horror is if you can lead me into a dark place where I don't know what's about to happen, and there you allow your imagination to know things in the dark that aren't there in the light, or nothing. There's a line I can't. There's a line somewhere about there's nothing there in the dark that wasn't there in the light, and the response to that line in the movie is, "Yeah, that's what scares me." But I think horror is anything that's going to take you out of your comfort zone and not give you any clue that we're going to put you back.
Mm,
And so I love a good old ghost story. I love ghost stories. I'm not big on, I grew up in the 80s when the slasher movies all started. We used to go to the drive-in movie where you could have all night long, dusk till dawn slasher
yeah.
marathons, and my buddies and I would take lawn chairs and just sit in the front row, and so we could watch these horrible, horrible slasher blood and gore and guts and
Yeah.
brains in your lap type horror. But they didn't scare me that like the movie Halloween did. Halloween scared you, and it was broad daylight because
Yeah.
you were scared for somebody else, which is on Stephen King's list of top 10 things that scare people. There's a fear of others and fear for others. It's like, I know these people, and someone's about to get, an axe in the face, and you're trying to don't go in there. There's a
Right.
guy in there with an axe. Can't you tell that? I know that. Why don't you know that? I
Yeah.
think horror is fear for others,
Yeah.
not torture. That's not scary to me. That's not what I would call a horror movie. That's just gore for gore's sake. But if
Mm-hmm.
you whatever your definition of horror is, go for it. That's part of why I like the black and white stuff. Still, it's that makes you get a little closer to the screen. Like you're
Mm-hmm.
getting really what's he gonna do?
Yep.
The mystery of black and white is part of what I like too.
Yeah. And also just the like advent of practical effects, and they're still trying things out, and it, even though so much of it doesn't stand up anymore, it's still just so like fascinating, and where you're like you're saying, you're leaning in to see it because it's just like, what is this, what's happening?
Yeah,
So
and then boo,
yep.
yeah,
Yeah, I love it. Something else too is we are a very queer podcast. We define horror as queer, and I know there has been a lot of scholarly work, especially in the past 20 years or so, about reading Mary Shelley's Frankenstein through a queer lens and understanding the character Frankenstein as queer in a way that is not just like sexuality, homosexuality, or anything like that. It's very clear he wants a Franken bride of some sort, and we get that in the
yeah.
second film
Hmm.
too. But like just this notion of like being on the margins of society, being forced into that position, and that kind of aspect of queerness and strangeness and weirdness.
Yeah,
And
and
so yeah, I think that comes through in your writing of that too.
yeah, there's a certain amount of I am not me, I am not man, I am men,
Mm,
or
Mm-hmm.
and does the creature get to refer to himself as they,
yeah.
because
Mm-hmm.
there's so many different parts in him from so many different people, and if all of them are alive in there somewhere with memories, what are they going through? And but to think of myself as they, because there's so much of me that is more than just one person.
Yeah.
Yeah. think that's a beautiful way of navigating it, and of kind of poking at some of the assumptions that we have around humanity, around gender, around queerness,
Yeah.
all of that. And it feels very Trinitarian, right? Like the simultaneously one and yet many.
The three beings that
One
make up
and
God
three.
dancing
Yeah.
around each other. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, well, I just want to again say just how great of a book this is. I'm encouraging all of our listeners to go out, get your copy. We'll
Yes.
have it linked in the show notes as well. But it's a short read, but like such a profound read. Like I found
Mhm.
myself having to stop multiple times to just kind of think, and I think that's such a great aspect of this
Thank
book. So
you.
thank you for that. Yeah.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much. I really
And I think,
appreciate the opportunity.
yeah, I will also echoing Pace, highly recommend. And I think part of what struck me as so powerful in the book is the places where I was like, this resonates as a queer person. This resonates as someone who, like, thinking about if your earth father is not a kind and loving and caring person, what, like, there is a way in which Frankenstein gives voice to prayers that we don't always hold space for in church communities
Hmm.
and in religious communities
Very much.
too.
I mean, the only spoiler I will give is just the very first word in here is the first prayer, and just a single word, and how much that captures in the story of Frankenstein and also theology.
What's the word? I got no.
Father.
What? I'm like looking at
I
my
know,
own
I was
book. I'm
like,
like,
wait,
Yep.
I gotta go
what?
find it.
Oh yeah.
The
All right.
word
I
is
got it.
Father.
Father. Just
Father with the question mark, like
yes.
Father.
Yeah, I
You know,
love it.
that's the entire prayer. Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, thank you again for joining us, Steve. This has been so fun. Where can our listeners find you? And do you have any like social media handles, any upcoming projects you want to shout out? All of that good
Yeah.
stuff.
The Frankenstein Book of Prayer has its own uh, Twitter and Instagram page that you can find it
Ooh.
there. Follow the book of or the Frankenstein Book of Prayer on Amazon. It'll take you right there. Any of those places, or find me on Facebook, just Steve Case, and like me, I'll like you back. As for upcoming projects, if this works, then I would love to see what else. I could keep exploring the monsters and horror uh, section of literature. Other books. I have a book out there on grief, which is doing pretty well, which is called
Mm.
"Fuck Death,"
Mm.
which is
Yes.
a book for those who are sick and tired of pity and condolence and all those
Yeah.
other horrible things that go along with losing somebody. That title is from one of my students who lost both parents in 2 years.
Oh, geez. Yeah.
So having her being able to come into my office and just say fuck this, it was
Yeah.
so liberating for her that I took that inspiration and put that into a book so that people could find their way out of the grief process. And then if you don't want to, if you're in need of a good biblical fart joke, I'm your guy. It's
Perfect.
all there. It's all there on Amazon.
Nice. That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, our next episode then is our Halloween special, which is going to be an extra long episode on The Exorcist, celebrating 50 years of that film. And we'll also be talking about the original novel by William Peter Blatty, all with special guest TJ Tranchel, who was on for our Twilight episode. And we got into some topics around Stephanie Meyer's like Mormon and LDS theology with that. But the
Mm-hmm.
other really cool thing about TJ Tranchel is he has written exorcism books. And so it's going to be really cool to have this conversation. And then we return to Star Wars with our next Star Wars book, from a certain point of view, Empire Strikes Back, and from a certain point of view, Return of the Jedi in November and December, respectively. So
Mm-hmm.
there we go. Uh, that's it for our show then. Our theme music was by Matt May. Horror Nerds at Church releases every Thursday. Please comment, rate, and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Support us on Patreon and get access to exclusive video of this episode, movie commentary episodes, BootTube episodes, and more bonus content by going to patreon.com/horrornerdsatchurch. It's only $5 to sign up, so much cheaper than, well, I already used the grave robbing one in the beginning. I have to think of a different one.
It's true. I mean, much cheaper than hiring and traveling to track down the monster that you create from the grave robbing.
Yes, there you go. Much cheaper than that. Booking a charter ship into the Arctic. Yep. So follow us on social media, Facebook and Instagram at Horror Nerds at Church, and Twitter HNACPOD.
And Blue Sky.
And Blue Sky, yes. New to Blue Sky for all the latest updates about upcoming films, news, and other announcements. Until next time, who's the monster? Is it Frankenstein, or is it Frankenstein's monster? Or is it both? Or is it neither? Who knows? Bye.